The We Are Venom season is going to be a huge one in Marvel Snap, if only because they're actually releasing 7 cards. I believe that's the most cards that they've added at one time since the time that they dropped Series 4 and 5. Now, I think part of the reason is because this happens to be a 5-week season instead of a 4-week season. So obviously that's going to contribute a lot to the pool. We also have a season pass card. And there is a brand new event coming to Marvel Snap. And that's going to be a way that you can get the card Agony. In this video, I want to just go over all 7 of the new cards, discuss which cards I think are going to be good and which cards maybe not, and what you should maybe spend your keys or tokens on and maybe what you shouldn't. And the first card that we're going to discuss is Agent Venom. That is the brand new Season Pass card. It's a 2/4, and on reveal, set the power of all cards in your deck to 4. I'm going to be honest with you. I think this is kind of a cool card, but I also am not sure. For whatever reason, it kind of feels a bit niche to me, which is kind of, I guess, I don't know, ironic that I thought Symbiote Spider-Man was going to be absolutely insane. And, he really wasn't necessarily as good as I thought he was. Still a good card, but kind of a more telegraphed version of Absorbing Man, which is kind of what made Symbiote Spider-Man a little niche in general. And Agent Venom seems pretty niche to me. But I guess the reason I bring up Symbiote Spider-Man is that I could be wrong. I want you guys to know that I don't know everything about the game. I can't predict with complete accuracy exactly what these cards are going to do and how they're going to impact the game. Because to me, Agent Venom doesn't seem that amazing. A lot of people are hyped about Agent Venom because they think that this is going to be a good way that Cerebro suddenly gets into the meta. I'm not fully convinced of that. I don't think that Cerebro decks are ever necessarily going to be meta decks. They're just kind of very niche and very okay at best. I think most people play Cerebro 2, some Cerebro 3, a little bit of Cerebro 5. I don't see many people playing Cerebro 4. So I don't think that Agent Venom is going to help out Cerebro 4 a whole lot. You definitely get them off early, and you have cards in there like Iron Man and Mystique and obviously Cerebro. These are all 0-cost cards. You're adding 4 power to them with the Agent Venom, but you're never guaranteed that that's going to be your play on turn 2. So I'm a little bit skeptical of it. I think a better use for Agent Venom is going to be sort of a negative deck without Mr. Negative. Because with Mr. Negative, this is a really, really bad idea to set all the power of your cards to 4 and then play negative on 4. Everything's going to be super expensive. It's going to be completely useless. But this kind of acts as a negative that you don't need to negate the deck. I feel like this would be a really solid card with Sage in your deck, Iron Man, Mystique. Even zoo decks can make this work, depending on the cost of the zoo cards. Obviously, gonna hurt Gilgamesh a little bit, gonna hurt Mockingbird. All in all, this could be a different way to build a zoo deck. I doubt that it's gonna be better than your standard Gilgamesh Mockingbird deck. But that's why I go back to sort of those negative deck cards that you're going to enhance their power and make them suddenly a little bit stronger. Usually you're not using those cards in a shell without Mr. Negative, but I think Agent Venom sort of makes that a possibility where it would be a reasonable deck to use. All in all, I feel like Agent Venom is going to be your typical season pass card. Nothing overpowered, nothing too crazy, but I think it's going to enhance certain archetypes. Archetypes like Cerebro, maybe a little bit of Destroy. It may create its own little archetype with like a negative deck shell without negative actually in it. That remains to be seen. It's something that I'm going to want to experiment with myself to kind of like get a feel for it. I think it'll probably be worth getting the season pass, every season pass card is seemingly worth it in some kind of way or another. Plus, of course, you're getting all the progress with the gold and the variants and those things from the season pass pack. So there's no huge flaws to Agent Venom, but I also don't think there's anything particularly special. Now, the next card we're going to talk about is Scream, and that is going to be coming out Tuesday at this same exact time as the season pass comes out. This is going to be in Spotlight Keys. When an enemy card moves, steal 2 power from it once per turn. Scream looks fun. Scream looks really, really good. This looks like a card I am going to seriously enjoy. It's going to be a counter to opponents' move decks, which are very, very strong into the meta right now. One of the few decks that are really being played a lot alongside Hela and Clog. So this is a way to kind of neutralize that a little bit. But more importantly, I feel like Scream is going to be an enabler for bringing back sort of a kind of old school deck archetype. A deck archetype that's going to have things like Polaris, maybe Kingpin, Arrow, Cannonball, Magneto. These cards that move your opponent's cards. If you're playing one of those cards on every turn, well, Scream is stealing 2 power from your opponent's cards and adding it to herself. That's a net positive of 4 power every turn if you're able to pull it off. Obviously, you might not be able to pull it off all the time, but it's kind of exciting to bring back that sort of old school, move your opponent's cards around, really disrupt their board. It's not a form of Clog, but it could work in that sense where you're taking your opponent's cards and using them to fill up one location that you know you can either beat or lose. And Scream may be strong enough in that situation to kind of carry a single location by herself. This is a card I am super hyped about. Do I think it's going to be OP? No. Do I think it's going to be end of the world? No. But I do think she's going to be a really cool card that opens up sort of an archetype that's been kind of forgotten. And also she's going to be a solid counter to move decks, which are kind of running rampant. All in all, I'm more excited about Scream than I am about Agent Venom. I think that Agent Venom might end up being the better card because I know there's things about Agent Venom that I'm not envisioning in terms of what he can do in this game. And Scream is a little more streamlined. I think I'm going to enjoy using Scream more, and it's going to cause a little more havoc than maybe Agent Venom would. Speaking of havoc, Agent Venom could work pretty well in like a weird tiny creature havoc type deck that's been running around that's also super fun. So I don't know, I guess that's a side note for Agent Venom. Back to Scream. I don't know, Scream seems like my kind of card personally. It's causing a little bit of chaos, stealing some power from the opponents, allowing you to disrupt them in an interesting way that we don't see very often in Marvel Snap anymore. I'm really excited about the emergence of that. Also, she works out really well with Kraven, which just got buffed in the last OTA. I have a feeling that the reason that Kraven got buffed is because of Scream. I think Scream is going to end up being around an average Marvel Snap card. I think there's a chance that it's slightly above average if she really makes that much of an impact on cards like Polaris, Kraven, Arrow, Cannonball. We could see sort of a little bit of a reemergence of those cards. And she also has techie undertones to her. Misery is another card that I'm pretty interested in. On reveal, repeat the on reveal abilities of all other cards here, then destroy them. Immediately, my first thoughts about Misery are, this is a card that you kind of want to wait and see what happens throughout the week before deciding to try and grab it with your Spotlight Key. Repeating an on reveal ability of your other cards in the entire location and then destroying them could be something really cool, really strong. Or it could be one of those things that looks really good in Marvel Snap and then doesn't have the payoff. Because I really, really struggle to find exactly the right cards to put there so that Misery can destroy them. Maybe cards like Ironheart, that would be really cool. Ironheart will go and buff all the cards in the other locations, and you're going to be able to destroy the ones in the current location. Another thing that comes to mind is maybe some sort of weird Shuri angle. I was trying to figure out how you could make it work, and I'm not really sure that you can. But my first thought was like play Shuri on 4, play Nimrod on 5, play Misery on 6, so that Misery suddenly becomes Shuri again, destroys the 12 power Nimrod. The buffed up Nimrod goes to the other locations, and then you play something like Maximus alongside the Misery. So now all of a sudden you got a 12 power Nimrod in one location, a 12 power Nimrod in another location, a 7 power Misery, and then a 12 power Maximus in that last location. It's I don't know if that's the type of thing that would really work, but it's certainly the type of thing I'm going to experiment with. Misery could maybe work in Destroy decks, or really maybe just kind of hurts Destroy decks. It's such a weird card that it's very polarizing. My thoughts on it are it's either going to be insanely OP or it's going to be dog shit. And I'm not really sure that there's any in between. So I guess my rating for Misery is wait and see what happens with other creators or with other people that are talking about the new cards, because it's so hard to determine whether or not this is going to be a good investment. The next card is Scorn, which I am much more excited about. When you discard this card, return it to your hand, give +2 to itself, and one of your cards in play. This is going to open up things for discard in a way that discard hasn't really been opened up too much. Typically with discard, you see 2 standard decks. One is Hela, which I hardly can consider that really full discard so much as just dumping a ton of power on the end and just being a casino type deck. So obviously that's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about discard. When I'm talking about regular discard, I'm talking about, standard Dracula, MODOK, Apocalypse. I think Scorn is going to open things up a lot more for discard. I think it's going to allow discard to improve the archetype, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it just ends up being an additional card to the standard Dracula, MODOK, Apocalypse type of deck. We could end up seeing a different type of version of discard. If you're discarding Scorn every turn, that's a lot of power that you're adding onto the board, and that's a lot of power that you're adding to this one little 1-drop that you could drop down there aside, say, MODOK on turn 6. Or Scorn can even become a mini Apocalypse that your Dracula ends up targeting at the end. Now, that's going to take a lot of work to get there, but it could be really cool. There used to be an old discard deck. I cannot remember for the life of me right now what we used to call it. It used to be a lot of small sort of 1-drops and then a Dracula at the end that ended up discarding just a big power card. We could end up bringing back that type of archetype. There could also be sort of a weird, small discard package that you could put together with a blade or a sword master that Scorn is just going to buff the cards that are out there on the board while getting discarded a couple times. And then all of a sudden, you got a 160 you could play at the end in sort of a zoo shell, turning her into sort of a version of Marvel Boy where she's also gaining the power instead of just spreading it across the board. I think there's a lot more possibilities with Scorn than just in discard. I think that people are going to get very creative with this card, and that makes it a really exciting card in my opinion. So I am very excited to see Scorn in action. Next up, we're going to talk about Agony, which Agony is going to be the reward of the new high voltage event in Marvel Snap. We don't know a ton about it, but we do know that it's only going to be a 3-round match where you and your opponent are going to get a random amount of energy each turn. You're both going to get the same amount of energy, and people are going to be able to play it a bunch, similar to Deadpool's Diner, but I think it's going to be easier to complete. I don't know that for sure. I don't know any special details that you guys don't know. A lot of people got Cassandra Nova from Deadpool's Diner. I think that was an event that a lot of people were able to complete throughout the week. And Agony is going to be the next reward in an event like that. Now, I don't think that Agony is going to be nearly as good as Cassandra Nova. However, I think she's going to be a pretty damn good card. After you play a card here, merge this with it. An interesting way to add power to a card. You're going to play her on turn 1, then you're going to play a card in that location, and she's going to merge with it. So she's just going to add more power to that card. She's going to be a card that improves Deadpool decks. She's going to be a card that improves probably move decks. Depending on the play action and how it works, she might even be a card that improves Brood or Mr. Sinister, but we don't know that yet. We don't know the order of operations, I guess. So I don't want to claim that because I would have thought that Aranya would help those, and she doesn't. All in all, I think Agony is going to be a card that almost everybody gets as long as they play that event. And even if you don't, she's going to be in Series 5 for tokens. But why spend tokens on her when you're going to be able to complete an event in a game that you probably would have already played anyway? And you can get her for free. I think she's going to end up working similar to Hulkbuster, where you're merging Hulkbuster into another card, which basically gives them the power. And for 1 cost, that's going to make Agony pretty valuable. And I think down the line, she's going to be a card that more people are going to want rather than not have, because she's going to fit into a ton of archetypes. She's going to be an extremely versatile card, so definitely get that event done. I think she's nothing overpowered, nothing too crazy, probably just sort of an average Marvel Snap card that's going to fit into certain decks, but also a card that you're going to really... We're moving back to the Spotlight keys, and Toxin is on reveal, return your other cards here to your hand, +2 power for each return. Toxin's going to add another layer to bounce. I think more often than not, you're going to be using Beast and Toxin on 5 instead of Beast and Falcon, because I think it's going to be a much more viable option. And it's going to allow you to return more than just your 1-drops. Toxin could end up getting very beefy when you do that, because +2 for each returned, that means usually he's going to at least be a 2/7. And usually you're not going to have Prio, so Killmonger won't be a pain in your side. And also, of course, you're going to be able to play all those cards back out on the board. This could help bring back the relevancy of Hitmonkey. At least maybe that's just a personal hope for myself, because I love Hitmonkey decks. I'm not really 100% sure that that's true, because bounce decks don't use Hitmonkey and they're perfectly viable at the moment. But either way, this is going to improve the bounce archetype. It's probably going to open up other avenues of bounce. So I really like this Toxin card. I think it's going to be an above average card in a bounce deck. If you're a bounce player, you're definitely going to want to have him. He's not very versatile. He's not going to be really a card that you're using outside of bounce. Though there is a chance, there is a chance that you could just use this without having to bounce anything back. You might have a couple cards in like maybe a weird Wiccan deck or something like that, like sort of a mid-range deck where Toxin is going to go on board and bring back some of those other cards that you want the on reveal to happen again. So you never know. And the last card that we're talking about for the season is Anti-Venom. And a lot of people are very hyped on this card. And a lot of people think that it's going to be kind of mid. So a bit of a polarizing card in and of itself. On reveal, set the cost and power of your deck's top card to 0. I've heard a lot of comparisons of this card to Iron Lad. I suppose that's sort of maybe true, but not really. Iron Lad kind of versatile, kind of can in a way fit into almost any deck. Doesn't really matter usually what card you're pulling from the Iron Lad. But Anti-Venom could be very painful. This is a really stupid scenario, but imagine you have Infinite as your top card, and now all of a sudden you use Anti-Venom, you draw 0/0 Infinite, You can't even play it without skipping a turn. Obviously, that's really fucking dumb. You're not putting Infinite into an Anti-Venom deck. I know that. But it's just the thought process that I go through. There's going to be really bad cards that you don't want to have in a deck with Anti-Venom. Sure, you could say the same thing about Iron Lad, but Anti-Venom's going to make those cards way, way worse. But there's a lot of cards that work really well with Anti-Venom. Think about Iron Man. That is the prime example. Iron Man suddenly is still a 0 power card, always was, but now it's a 0 cost card. Now you're automatically doubling the power of a location completely for free. Those are my really basic sort of prehistoric examples of the good and the bad of Anti-Venom. I think that this is going to end up being a wait and see card. You wait for probably towards the end of the week to see how people's reactions are with this card. I think it could be really amazing, but I also think it could be terrible. It really is very similar to Misery, where the effect seems really, really powerful on paper, but could just be a complete disaster in practice. I'm excited to try this card out, but for the average no money spent person, this feels like it's probably a skip week in terms of spotlight keys, but most definitely a wait and see week to just sort of find out whether or not this card is really as powerful as it maybe sounds in your head. But those are the 7 brand new cards in Marvel Snap coming to the We Are Venom season. Let me know in the comments section. Do you agree with my assessment? Do you disagree with my assessments? I'm really curious because some of these are very complex cards that I don't know. Maybe I don't have the imagination to sort of see them really succeeding, but I also just don't believe that they're all going to really be as good as maybe they seem, or maybe as much as people are hyping them up. So let me know in the comments section. How do you feel about it? If you watched the whole video, really, thank you. It was a long one, I know, but I wanted to get my thoughts out there about these cards. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel because we got a ton of content every week on this channel. I appreciate you guys very, very much for hanging around.